Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Don's sitting in the host chair today, and I have a screen of people in front of me right now that I'm happy to see. I'll just put it that way. I'm going to go around from left to right. That also means that I'm doing ladies first. So in the upper left-hand corner, there's my daughter, Alexis. She gets to go first for all kinds of reasons. Nepotism counts here, guys, just so you know. So Lex, glad you're able to join us tonight.
Thank you. And just so Chris sees, I changed my name in the system on Zoom.
There you go.
She just noticed that.
When Chris and I did the episode a few weeks ago, I changed it, but I didn't change it on the system. So he went in and actually changed it back. If you listen to that one. But
all right.
Hey guys, nice to see everybody.
Good to have you there. I also have Eric Rush. Eric, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to be here with everybody. It's been a couple of months, and it's great to get the band back together.
I agree. I have Robert Koshu to his right. Robert, how are you doing this evening?
Good. Great to be back. I'm kind of like Eric. I've been off running around doing work things for the past several months.
Yeah, we'll spend just a very brief time, catching up without going into all the details about, why things have been sporadic for the last 2 months. But I think Eric's way of describing it hits it on the head. It's getting the band back together. We're back in the studio, and there's music coming for airplay, and there might even be an album. So stay tuned. And then I have in the bottom of the screen, not at the bottom in any place but on the screen, but there's Chris Capola. Chris, how are you this evening?
Hey to the nice people.
There you go. See, I didn't fall for it. There you go. What we thought we would do, this is actually episode number 150 of A Fork in Time. And so what we wanted to do was not be self-indulgent, but talk a little bit about the journey of the podcast. I'd like to start with Lex. And you and I talked a little bit about how things got started, and then go around the virtual room here, just about what everyone's experience has been. The thing that I will say before we get into that, I was just sharing with the team, as we like to say off podcast, before we were getting started here, that I'm just reminded about this has been a lot of fun. I think we all enjoy, as you can tell if you listen to episodes, talking about history and talking about alternate history, be it on Fork in Time or the room where it happened. But I've just enjoyed meeting some new people along this journey. That has been the most rewarding thing for me in doing this. And I didn't expect that to be what would happen the way that it happened. And I'm very glad that is the way that it's happened. And so I just want to say that to the guys that I see here. There's a couple people we don't see here. We don't see Eric Bond, who's joined us a lot here of late. We don't see some other names that I know will come up that have been frequent guests on the show that, part of the journey as well. But to me, this is what A Fork in Time, a room where it happened is about talking about subjects that I enjoy, laughing with people that I've gotten to meet that I wouldn't have met if it weren't for this experience. So I'll just tell the story pretty quickly, and Lex, you can jump in here. This was this was 2019, May-ish timeframe of 2019. And Alexis and my wife went to Dallas for a wedding, and I can't tell you whose wedding it was. I'm thinking it might have been.
It was our cousin.
It was, yeah, that's what I thought. And for whatever reason, I didn't go that weekend. So I found myself sitting around the house, and I'd watched baseball. I'd done some other things. I'd played about 14,000 games of Ticket to Ride on my iPad, which is one of my little ways to kill some time while I'm doing that and maybe doing something else. I've been thinking about this concept, and Alexis and I had talked about it a few times, about the fact that we are both avid podcast listeners, and maybe it would be fun to have a podcast. Well, what would we do as a podcast together? Well, history was the logical thing that was there. And I guess at that particular point in time, I just realized I've lost the name of the show that was on NBC, but there was a show on NBC that was based around the concept of history being altered, them going back. Timeless. Yes, thank you. What was on. And so that was the spark that was there, although I had certainly read, Turtle Dove's novels and other things, that had me having an interest in alternative history. And then, of course, I guess what was also at or about that time was the production on Amazon Prime of The Man in the High Castle, which, of course, is the other, I think, super classic alternative history. So that was front. It was on the front burner, the concept of alternate history, this idea of doing a podcast. And so I started poking around on the computer. Okay, how do you host one of these things? How do you even do this? What does it cost? Where do you do it? Landed upon Buzzsprout, where we host the podcast and still do this day. By the way, plug the Buzzsprout. If you're starting one, I think it's as good as anything, at a good place to start and reasonably priced. They'll let you start for free, which was actually one of the most attractive things for me that night is, okay, if this doesn't work out, no money out of pocket that I have to justify to my spouse who's away for the weekend, that what I've done here. And so I did that. And that night I recorded the introduction and I posted the introduction on my Facebook page. And the next morning, that was a Saturday, the next morning at church, someone at church said, "Hey, I saw your post on Facebook and I listened to your little introduction. I'm excited about this." And I'm like, "Oh, wow. If I actually do this, people will listen to this." I knew that would what a podcast was, but I hadn't thought that would actually happen. And so I think, Alexis, if I remember correctly, I sort of broke the news to you when you guys got back. No. How did that go down?
I was on the charter bus because this wedding was in the country. He said Dallas. It was Dallas adjacent. It was in the country. And so there was a charter bus that took us from the venue back to our cars. And you sent me a text with the teaser episode in the text.
Okay.
With no context. It was just the teaser episode.
And a podcast was born. And then I quickly realized, I really don't have a microphone for this. And I got to go get some free editing software for audio and that kind of thing. So we stumbled our way into it. For actually the day of Alexis's wedding, I was sitting in the hotel room that morning before things went over. And, if you've listened to recently, the episode that I reposted that day, sort of with a wrapper around it, was the first episode that Alexis and I did together. Anybody want to guess where we went in the world? Just anybody want to go out on that limb?
Jamaica.
Yeah. Yes, Jamaica. It was Jamaica, Eric, because we always go to Jamaica when Alexis is on. And so that was no more. It was no round tables was the name of that particular episode. And obviously it featured what would have happened if there actually had been a real King Arthur, which is who would have been on the throne versus Henry VIII. And so it launched on from there. So that's my memory of 2019, getting it started, then suddenly realizing, doing this every week is actually more work than I thought it was. It's fun, but it's more work than I thought it was because we'd committed to a weekly cycle. Alexis started doing a couple of episodes on her own. I guess you were still living in Galveston at the time. So when you would come in some weekends, we would find some ways to do. We finally bought a mixing thing and some microphones I can see over here to my left. That was my Christmas present actually from Alexis that year. So that got us going there. And the next thing you know, we had a podcast. What are your memories of Go ahead, Lex.
I have a funny story because you mentioned my wedding and posting that episode. During our dance, our father-daughter dance, one of the things we talked about was the fact I was like, "Hey, I saw on my phone you posted the episode." To give what your response was, "Well, it's Friday." But if you watch the actual video of our dance, you can see that we're talking, but you can't see what we're talking about. And so I think my mom asked me, like, what were you and Dad talking about in the dance? And I said, well, one of the things was the podcast. And she was like, that's a weird thing to talk about during your father-daughter dance at your wedding. And I'm like, not for being Dad.
That's true. And it was a great song. I sang to you also while we danced.
Yes, you did. That was that was another thing that happened during the talking. But one of the things we definitely talked about the podcast while we were dancing.
So the cool thing that happened, you have anything else you want to share about the early part of the podcast there, Lex?
No, I thought that was funny that I was like, I saw that you posted the episode. And you were like, well, it's Friday. Just because you got married doesn't mean we can't post an episode.
And we hadn't recorded one. So, hey, I can put a little wrapper around one we did before. It was, so for you Star Trek fans, it was like making the menagerie work, kind of thing. We put a wrapper around it and we're good to go. Then an interesting thing happened. The first couple of times we had guests, I reached out to people that I knew that I thought would be good to have on the show. The first guest on the show, the trivia questionnaire, Ryan Cole, who's appeared a couple of times. One of my favorite episodes still to this day, 42 Revisited. Ryan and I talked baseball. If you know Ryan's father, Kenny Cole, good friend of mine, lover of
Officiate
history.
at my wedding. We're just
Yeah.
going to keep mentioning my wedding.
Yeah, there you go. Why not? It's fresh, and Jake's behind, and we can see Alexis' husband sitting behind there, so that's okay too. So I had him on for that episode. Known Ryan since he was a kid. It was cool to have him on and talk baseball and talk other things, and then interesting things started happening when people started emailing the show and filling out the little website that I guess I got built within the first couple of months there, and listener suggestions. And before you knew it, I guess the first outside guest that we had has made a number of appearances on the show. Brant Frost has been on the show a number of times. Brant's a busy guy over in Georgia, involved in politics, and doesn't have a lot of time to record these days. We keep talking about luring him back because Brent's forgotten more presidential history than I have. We'll forget more presidential history in this 30 minutes than I will probably known in my entire life. But I remember the first time that, Brant suggested a topic, and I reached back out to him by email and said, hey, would you like to join for that topic? And I remember the phone call that night on the phone, the first time we talked, and yeah, I'd love to do that. And from there on, anytime someone normally brings a suggestion, for the most part, that's one of the offers that we make is, hey, would you like to come on the show? And the next thing you know, Robert was on a show, I think also with Ryan. We did a show about Star Wars.
Star Wars had never been released.
And so again, pulling people that I knew in, Brant comes, as somebody I'd never met, but, had an interest and had an affinity the first time we talked on the phone, and he enjoyed being on the show. And then eventually we get to this guy that sends an email that's got this really wacky idea. And this wacky idea involves Annie Oakley and German leadership. And so, Chris, tell the story of how you and I got connected.
So this is kind of, I want to call it kind of a Forrest Gump moment, because it's like my life popping up through what's going on in the world. Because I distinctly remember I was sitting in a McDonald's when I wrote that initial email. And here's the fun story about that McDonald's. It is across the street from Discovery, the Discovery Channel headquarters, which, if you know a little of the geography and the history of that building, there was some big news coverage of it a couple of years ago. And my mother was sitting in her bed recovering from surgery and pointed, that's McDonald's right by Chris's house, because there were news helicopters flying over and you could see it. So that was a little interesting thing. That initial phone call we had was on my last business trip in early March 2020. Basically, we talked when I was in California. I flew back on a red eye. We recorded that episode when I was in North Carolina.
Right. And
the world shut down, I want to say the next day. Yeah.
And the topic of that, as I recall, was what would have happened if Annie Oakley had missed the cigar and hit Kaiser Wilhelm.
Kaiser.
Right? Yeah. And it's a really weird one where, like, most people don't realize it's really hard to click that. No, those two people actually met, were alive at the same time.
Yeah. And had that brief encounter. And then I guess it was, didn't have much of a chance to interact with Robert after the guest hosting that he did. Just to give Robert a little chance to shout it here. I knew that Robert had been participating for a number of years on a weekly podcast with a group of men from his church called the Man Up Podcast, podcast about spiritual formation. So I knew that he had podcast familiarity. We had talked a little bit about that when he was on the show. And it just seemed a logical thing at one point. I've got all these nice people that I've met. We'll get around here to Eric here in a minute. Nice people that I've met, why haven't I gone back to this guy that I've known for years and years and years? And we share some common history that goes all the way back to doing some political / social studies things back in high school. We participated together in a Model UN program that, candidly, let me just say this, our high school dominated that program. We did for a number of years.
Because we chose, this was the year before Don was in. We chose to represent Iran in the International Court of Justice, and we won. Thank you very much. On
And
the legality of the hostage rescue mission. The next year, Don, the guy that joined with me the first year, he moved on to become our chief delegate. Don joins with me, and we take Argentina for the International Court of Justice, and we come within one vote of actually winning to prove that the Isle de La Malvinas were actually owned by Argentina at the time.
yeah.
And the English illegally invaded and took it over, and then played Ireland and played the most neutral country ever in the history of the world at a Security Council after that. So
Yes.
we had some intriguing alternate history. And yeah, I had done mine. What I remember something that, Don, I mean, you didn't mention it. I remember seeing we had reconnected via Facebook, had kind of, life moving on, moving around. And I remember seeing a post before you actually started that said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm kind of thinking about this alternate history podcast." And I remember responding going, "Oh, that sounds kind of cool." that was something. And then he called me up and was kind enough to work through my audio issues that were just insane that night, because when we did the Star Wars episode, because we had a water leak at our house. So we were actually living in a rent house at the time. So I had to go find a place to call in on. And I think I did it on the floor of a room surrounded by 500 boxes, basically.
There you go. Yeah.
At the time. So, but yeah, and it's been fun to watch this podcast evolve, and it's been great becoming and grabbing and being a real part of it.
Yeah, I wish I would have brought you in sooner, Robert. I'm glad that if I finally woke up and got around to it. Last guy that I hadn't had a chance to visit here, I see on the left-hand side of my screen, which is Eric Rush. And I guess, Eric, you reached out. Your topic suggestion, the first one I remember was on what if there'd been no polio vaccine, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't think you had submitted anything before that.
No.
The first time that we had talked, I remember doing that episode, and my wife, who's a physician assistant, so has medical training, she said, "Well, who are you recording with tonight?" Because by this point, Chris had become pretty regular, and some of the others that were there. I said, this really cool physician who does research up in Kansas City, and we did an episode on the polio vaccine. And so, Eric, what was your memory of getting connected to the podcast?
Yeah, so I've been a consumer of alternate history media for a number of years. I started reading some of the kind of the classic works when I was in high school, and I'd been an occasional consumer of additional media. But I'm busy. I have a lot of stuff on my plate, and it kind of fell off the radar until the summer of 2020 when we were in a pandemic. And it was the summer I was bored. I was stir crazy. I'm very extroverted. I don't do well when I'm not, with other people. And so I was trying to get outside. And so when I'm outside and I'm, either walking or jogging, I like to have podcasts to listen to. And I thought, gosh, I'd really like to kind of tune back into some alternate history. I wonder what's out there in the podosphere. So I did a quick search and I came across this episode, or this podcast. And this was, summer of 2020. And so I had a pretty substantial back catalog. And so I'm like, well, gosh, this Pockets with No Posies. And kind of in the early part of this, like that, that sounds pretty interesting. And so I started listening. And this is when the podcast was pretty much just Don and Alexis. Not I shouldn't say just, it was Don and Alexis. And so I'm like, well, gosh, this is a really entertaining podcast. This is really interesting. They seem really nice. I'm going to keep listening. And then I started kind of working my way through the back catalog and getting more and more current. And then I saw some of the guest hosts, and I started to hear Chris coming on more frequently. And I'm like, gosh, he sure knows his stuff. This is really good. I said, you know what? Maybe I need to get involved in this. This is November of 2020. And so I reached out I said, I'm going to be a patron. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be a patron. I did this in December of 2020. And then it was a couple of months later after Don and I had a chance to visit a couple of times that I did that polio episode. So I have to credit, obviously I credit Don and Alexis for the podcast being a thing at all. But I credit Chris for kind of blazing the trail of going from guest host to being part of the team. Like, gosh, that sounds really fun. And it has been. It's been great.
Yeah. And the other thing I just want to say to you guys here, I think I've said it on other episodes, particularly as we were going through, and all of us had different things going on with work or personal life over the last 3 to 4 months, leading up to it, including Alexis's wedding there in February. But then after that, we had a close family member who had a serious health issue that happened in late March, and we're still recovering and dealing with that. And, one of the cool things about the fact that we had built a team of people by then was that, Eric and Chris and Robert, you guys just jumped in. And I remember somebody asking me, at some point here in the last couple of months, what's your favorite episode? Well, it's like picking among your kids. How do you pick out your favorite episode? So what was really cool though was this has been in the last 4 to 5 months. It was an episode that I think Chris and Robert produced, where and also one that Chris and Eric did. Now that I'm thinking about some of the space related things, and I said, some of my favorite episodes were the ones where it didn't start with, "Hi, this is Don sitting in the host chair." I actually got to be a listener to my own podcast, which was Same. At that point we had gone to a different place. And, what was really cool with all that was going on there, as busy as we were, this was leading up to the wedding, that you guys had taken on some of that responsibility there as well, was that, that we said it a lot. Alexis and I said it a lot for the first 100 episodes or so, we're trying to build a community here, and boom, we had a community. And that community, stepped up. And, if you're a listener and you stayed through that period and you go all the way back, you've heard the whole back catalog or whatever it is, you sort of know that evolution because it sort of unfolds week by week. But to me, that was like, this is, when I started this in May of 19, this is not what I envisioned, but I am really, really happy this is what this has become. And, that was the transformation of A Fork in Time to me. We're not setting download records at all, but we have an audience, given how niche we are as a podcast, and we're pretty niche. We're about as niche as you can get in a lot of ways, to some degree. We have on average about 450 to 500 downloads of every new episode. That's with no marketing, no dollars spent. Who knows what would happen if we actually, got a little exposure out of that. But, it's never been about that. But just the realization, because this came up with yesterday. You'll hear this as the next episode that gets released. It's already recorded. By the way, listen to it. I think it's a really good one. It's about what would have happened if Elvis hadn't died in 1977. And again, this was a listener suggested topic. I reached out to the listener. He was happy to jump on the podcast. And I got through with that recording yesterday, and a family member asked me, well, who are you recording with today? That's exactly how they asked the question. We're a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, did you and Alexis record, or did one of you guys do a solo episode? Now it's, who did you record with today? I said, well, this is really cool guy that was a tour guide in Memphis. No, by the way, I found out after the fact he's a lawyer during the day. That never came up in our conversation before in the podcast. Is here's this guy who's an attorney there in Memphis, because we were talking about something that had nothing to do with the law. It was a common interest that we shared. And this was this guy who was, and I guess I can't call him a stranger now because we spent an hour talking to each other face to face over a video over Zoom, recording this episode yesterday. But here's a guy I didn't know he existed until 3 weeks ago. And we just got through doing this thing together that's sort of creative. And that to me is also really cool. And so just thank you to you guys. Thank you to our listeners for indulging us, when we do this process. And just, it's cool. Anybody else have anything they want to share that's crossed their mind while I was rambling on there like Don does?
Well, I was just going to say, are we really sure that Elvis is dead?
Well, I said this at the start of so that, spoiler alert, I said this at the start of the episode with Dylan. I said, this may be the easiest A Fork in Time ever, because if you want to imagine this alternate world, just look around, you're living in it.
Well, I remember growing up. So, in the 80s and 90s, and there was this, this goofball tabloid called the Weekly World News. I don't know if anybody remembers that one.
I remember that one.
And every single week it was, Elvis Lives.
No. It was
Bad
not
Boy?
Every single week. It would be Elvis or Hitler somewhere. One of those two people. And they did alternate pretty regularly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Point taken, Chris. Point taken.
Yeah. And but the other thing about that is the topic, and again, listen to the episode. It's a good one, guys. It'll be the one that follows this one, is the realization that we have talked about some really serious historical things on A Fork in Time and Room Where It Happened, which that's a whole other story about how that came to be. But we also love, there was a Star Wars episodes about baseball. We did hear one recently about alternative casting. We seem to get back to Star Wars a lot. I guess there's a reason for that. It's alternate history tends to fall more in the, in the science fiction genre. But, for an alternate history podcast, it's not always, Henry VIII and alternatives, for the English throne. It's a lot of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it can be about baseball, or it can be about Elvis. It can be about pop culture, those types of things. And I enjoy those episodes as much as I enjoy the quote unquote, real history episodes, if you will, because I think it's a diversity that's part of our audience. I see Chris laughing like he wants to say something. So go ahead and unmute, Chris.
What I love is taking those blood and iron episodes, those serious ones, and just having some fun with it from time to time. Some of the places we've gone, I'm thinking of the Lime Lobby. That was a fun one. We've been able not just to do fun episodes, but to kind of take some of that heavy stuff in fun places.
Yeah. And, the other interesting thing is that I've had coworkers who I know are listeners, and we've talked about this, who aren't regular listeners, but catch something sporadically, or they'll catch, by the title. Hey, I'd listen to that one because of whatever it was. And it's also worked the other way, Chris, where we take something light and, end up talking about its cultural or its significance in society. If you don't think Star Wars has impacted society, you don't understand how Star Wars has impacted society, just terminology that we use and other things like that. Would the world be substantially different? Not substantially different, but the world would be different without that common cultural reference. And so I like the fact that we've gone to both places. The future, guys, where's this thing going to go? Any thoughts on where we're headed, given where we've been?
Yeah, I think we've still got a lot of topics left. I think there's an awful lot of human history that we haven't approached yet. Barely scratched the surface after 150 episodes. I think that the strength of the podcast has become the diversity of the people who are involved in it, and that's not just the people who are on tonight. And I think we've got some, I'm sure some exciting guest hosts that are going to come on here in the near future. I think that's going to be very exciting. I still want to do more kind of YouTube Q&A sort of stuff. I think Chris, you did you did the unscripted episode with. Was that with Robert? Did you guys do like the what's that? Eric Bond. Okay, that's right. And that was fun. It was fun to listen to because there was a lot of that banter in the beginning, and I was listening to it and I was chuckling because it's like, yep, that's how it is right before we start recording.
Oh, the one where we actually kind of released the off podcast one.
Yeah, that was really good. I really like that one. And so I would love to do, and I don't know if our listeners would, I don't know how many people would show up for it, but I would love to do a YouTube Q&A where a bunch of us are just getting on. Probably all of us, plus Eric Bond and, anybody else who wants to join. And, the listeners just come on and, ask us questions and we answer, and, there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of banter. I think that sounds like so much fun.
So you really scared me for a second.
Why?
There.
Why did that scare you, Chris?
Okay. Because you said the word YouTube.
And,
and I was thinking about that episode that Robert and I did that we did as a video episode.
Was that the Mexican one or the?
No, that was the Peninsula Campaign one.
Peninsula Campaign. Okay. I was trying to remember which one we did.
That I turned myself into a production company.
He did. Chris Capola Productions.
And we actually did the video on it. And guys, I love to have people look at it. I think it's a really interesting topic. I really loved the way we did it. That was also over a break where I could spend, 2 weeks sitting there drawing maps. And so for a second there, I thought you were talking about doing that again.
I don't think so. I think we do it I think we do it unscripted. I think we give it little. We give it a few weeks of promotion in the in the podcast, and in both podcasts, and say, the crew is going to be here on, whatever date this is. And we have a couple hours, and probably not, and the production time is is blind to our listeners, but it's on Sunday nights, which is probably not the best time to do a Q&A, but we could do it's called a happy hour Q&A. I don't know,
like that.
4 to 6 Central Time or something like that. Most of us are Central Time.
And then we could actually get into it's happy hour somewhere, just like tracking who it's happy hour for. Yeah.
which happy hour is where.
And I will have bourbon involved. If
who knows what'll happen with adult beverages?
Yeah,
part of the equation
for sure.
Well, and the thing is, Don, I look forward to. I like doing the serious episodes, but I like doing the fun ones. I know you and I have been bantering back and forth about an alternate football podcast.
Yeah,
and I have, because of familial connections, I have huge insight into how at least the last two alternate football leagues that had any measure of success, the XFL 2020 and the most recent USFL 2022 version, how both of those unfolded and finished from start to end on both of those, as well as a couple of intriguing things on a few other groups that now seen a piece of.
Eric, I really like the idea. The worst case scenario is no listeners show up, which I guess is a possibility, and it's just us, and we have fun doing that anyway. So there you go. It's a win-win. We can't lose. But I do think we would, if we promoted it right, we would have. I know that because of what's happened over the last 3 to 4 months, and we've been spotty with our release schedule, and not, one of the things I was very proud of in the first 120-ish episodes of the show, we got a show out every week. Wasn't always the quality maybe we wanted it to be. Sometimes it was scrambling for Alexis and I to do a solo. We're going to sit down and knock this out. Not that we didn't have fun when we did it, but we got to get this done. Got to make the donuts kind of thing. And our listeners, when I was looking back at statistics, I hadn't looked at statistics until about 2 or 3 weeks ago as things sort of settled down. And I expected our listener numbers and our download numbers just to be half, of what they were before this. Because I know that for me, and I follow and listen to a number of podcasts, if they're not producing regularly, they get out of my rotation. If you're not going to be consistent, there's plenty that are, and I'll go with the things that are consistent. And what I saw there, we had a little bit of drop off. You can see it in the number of downloads, but that's only because of the number of episodes. The listeners that we have seem to be, and we're appreciative of them, seem to be very loyal. They've stuck with us through this. We've tried to communicate with them. It's fresh, it's evolving. It's not where it was. It's not where probably it's going to be. Again, one of the cool things to me now is it's not that thing of Alexis and I going, hey, you did a solo one last week, I'll do a solo one this week. Sometime around episode 40 or 50, we had tons of ideas, but no time to get it done because we both had real, our regular jobs. It was just on us. Well, now I see the screen here and I know that, if I can't do it one week, Robert and Chris can probably find a time to get with each other, or whatever the case might be and knock it out. And that's been a big plus. So Eric, we will make that happen. We'll figure out how to make it happen. And you teased it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and tease it here because it's going to be coming up and it's going to be good. The other thing we've seen in the last 3 to 4 months, I get a lot of emails now or things that come in through the website. By the way, if you're a listener, you haven't been to the website, it is not going to win any website awards, but there is utility there. There's a place for you to go and provide feedback to our surveys and the other things that are there. But getting more and more emails or feedbacks that come in where it's somebody who has a book, an author, or something like that that'd like to come on and it's relevant. It's not just somebody hawking their book, and this is relevant stuff. And I'm real excited about. We're going to be doing this. I'll just go ahead and reveal it. This is also committed to us more, but we have an author who's a political scientist, so near and dear to my heart, is a published author, a number of different books. Dr. Bo Breslin is his name if you want to go and look him up. So now we're committed to it. He has to come on, but he said he will, so we're good. But he wrote a book, and our concept here is going to be it fits well with our other podcast format as well as a fork in time. The concept, for those of you that don't listen to the room where it happened, and I just logically assume there's overlap there. There has to be some listeners that are one and not the other, just has to be. But the concept of the room is it often turns into a what if discussion just because that's where we go. But it's designed around talking about a particular room, a historical event normally that we center that around the geographic place, and then we sort of dissect the historical event. And that's what we do on the room where it happened. So the idea for this series that's coming up with Dr. Breslin, by the way, he likes to be called Bo, so let me get in the habit of doing that. What Bo's going to join us for is the room is actually going to be Jefferson's residence in Paris, because that's where Jefferson is at the time that the Constitutional Convention has been completed, and then they're going through the ratification process. And so there's a famous letter correspondence from Jefferson to his friend Madison, known as the father of the Constitution. And Jefferson has this thought, many of our listeners have probably heard about, that constitutions ought to be generational, this idea that there ought to be continuous revolution. And so his thought was that, once every generation, there ought to be a new convention for a new constitution. And so what Bo has done in his book is he's taken that concept and assumed that that's actually what was built into the Constitution, which actually didn't become reality. And then he goes through 5 hypothetical future constitutional conventions. Sounds a lot like a Fork in Time episode to me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to launch that episode with a room where it happened, sort of the concept is there, and then we'll do a series of A Fork in Times where we unpack that. As we were talking actually right before we began recording here, we want to do more of this type of thing. We're able to bring in academics, and the people that I see on the screen here know a lot about history as lay historians, a lot about history. But bringing actual bona fide academics on who can talk those subjects and can provide some insights there, I think is really cool. And that's another thing that you'll see us, I think, do more over the next 6 months to a year as those opportunities afford themselves, more of that. So I'm on board, Eric. I'm on board for our first live stream. We just got to figure out how to make it happen. And awesome. One of the other things that we also, similar to what Chris and Robert did, is one thing we've actually just talked about for our patrons just over on the on Patreon for the stream that's there. Getting more consistent about releasing episodes early there, which is supposed to be one of the benefits of being a patron. And we've done that sporadically at times, getting better about it. For example, that episode I talked about, the Elvis episode, that's there now.
Yeah, because I was like, wait, you released it. And then I was like, oh, wait, it's because I have the patron feed.
Yeah. But then the other thing that goes with that is, even like tonight, we could have started recording while we were bantering back and forth once we got past some of the personal stuff. And we can throw these videos just up on, and some of the discussion that's there. Some of the funniest things I've heard with this cast of characters has been when we weren't recording. And so let you see some of that as well. Chris, Robert, any thoughts from you guys about where we're headed?
I will say, I do think it's a great idea that we've set, our time. Most of them wound up being this time anyway, but I think, putting it on your calendar, I think that's really going to help us get back to it.
With the consistency of what's there. Because, all of us do this for fun when see everybody on this screen, and I know what their jobs are. We're all busy. And so as much as we want to do it, it takes the time to coordinate and get the scheduling done. So I think you're going to see better consistency on that. And as I was just sharing with the team here, just because of some of the personal life events that have gone on the last couple of months, this is a very healthy distraction and release for me. I need this for my own sanity at times. And I think that's true. A lot of the folks that are here, this is something that we enjoy doing, that for an hour or two, we can unplug our brains from the real world and, talk about. By the way, I was one of those guys in the 80s, Eric, who actually was willing to believe that Elvis might have faked his own death. I'm enough of a conspiracy guy that, maybe he did.
Was it big peanut butter trying to up the sales of banana and peanut butter sandwiches?
Yeah,
is that what?
Actually, we talked about it a little bit on the episode. I don't want to steal too much of the thunder there, but you have this. One of the things we often get into is we have an idea for an episode, but then one of the things we talk about right before we record is what's the fork going to be, because we have a couple of different ideas about what the alternative is. We haven't always agreed upon that, and so one of the things that on the Elvis episode being a good example of this, I'm sitting there with Dylan. What's our fork going to be? Does he still have the medical event, but he survives? And so he has this, it's like a wake up call. I need to, and so much of it, there was a pharmacological soup apparently in Elvis's blood, from the toxicology report, prescription medication. Dr. Nick kept him pretty well medicated up and down, everything you would need there. But most of what led to, what happened to Elvis was his eating habits. He was, it was a lot of comfort food in a lot of large quantity. And, so we actually spent some time talking about that. So I'm not sure if it was big. I'm not sure if it was big peanut butter, Chris, or if it was actually just big bread loaf that was out to get the king. But we talked about that a little bit.
I would say that it was a combination of peanut butter, bread, codeine, and Demerol. We're kind of did Elvis in.
Those are any of those things by themselves can be bad. In combination, they can be extra bad, right?
Evidently, they can be deadly.
Yeah,
there is gradations. There are gradations. You don't need a script to get jiffy, okay?
You can't get Demerol anymore, and for good reason.
Yeah. So again, we have talked about things as vital as Protestants versus Catholics in the Renaissance. We've talked about baseball and Elvis in these last 150 episodes. And if we do our job right, we'll continue to be that diverse moving forward. One of the things we've talked about, I also want to encourage our listeners here. We've done this a couple of times. Is one of the things we'd like to do is widen our geographic diversity about where we go to. So if you're a listener in another hemisphere, we have some listeners I know in Oceania. We have some listeners in Asia, a couple in Africa, believe it or not. They do show up on the map. Give us some suggestions for those, and also the time frames that are involved. Going back a little bit more into classical history. I'm talking, before the Roman Empire. I'm talking, late Bronze Age kind of stuff, and the things that are there. That's a big part that we've never touched in any big way. I think that there's a lot of good stuff to dig out of that. So, as Eric said earlier, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of history out there. We've only barely scratched the surface because we've actually gone back and revisited some of the same topics 2 or 3 times from different angles, all with interesting points of view, but that means we haven't done something new when we've done it. All right. Any closing words here before we shut out this episode number 150, guys? All right. Again, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate this is also something that I get to do with my daughter. That's the other thing I should mention as well. We talked about this while I'm dancing with her at her wedding. So it's obviously we share a lot of things, but this is something that we're able to share. And I also would just encourage anybody out there who has an idea, again, not just coming to us. If this is something you think you'd enjoy doing, start your own. You're not the competition. We think of this as being a community. And if it's something you think you're interested in, let us know. We'll support you. We'll mention you on the show. We'll come and be a guest. Brody Burton is somebody that we didn't even mention here. Sort of lost touch with Brody. Brody was a teenager who had started his own podcast, and he reached out to me, and we stumbled into him, and we shared a few episodes there, did a crossover episode. But you're not bounded financially. It's a fairly easy thing to get rolling and get going. You're not bounded by age. The technology exists. So either come and join us on A Fork in Time or The Room Where It Happened, or come just join us in the community with your own podcast. We'll be happy to support you and help you there if that's how it works. All right. I've rambled a lot, which Don is prone to do. So this is the part where I shut up unless anybody has anything else to say. I'm going to pitch it to Alexis with the suggestion of how we close every episode. Only seems fitting. What is our suggestion to any of our listeners that happen upon A Fork in Time?
They should take it.
They should take it. All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.